Hello, welcome back to Laptop Trader channel on YouTube. My name is Philip. I'll be hosting this quick presentation. This will be an update for the third week ending here in April 2026. My email contacts laptoptraderphil@gmail.com. This video is for information only and should not be considered investing advice. Caution, trade at your own risk. Okay, just quick disclaimer. And again, invest in yourself. That's a recurring slide. What does it mean to protect yourself at all times? Let's not worry about the agenda. Actually, the agenda for this video is going to be, I wanted to discuss a recent stop out on a trade I had in BORR Boring Company. I've got some other ideas for you guys going forward as the market continues to push higher. And I want to discuss quickly why technical analysis sometimes gets a bad name, and then I'm going to go over a few key concepts, and then at the end, I'm going to review about 10 or 12 different stocks. Again, this is still a great time to study the markets after they've corrected. Let's get down. Oh, I want to bring this up to you guys. Look over this slide in your spare time about if you had a $10,000 trading account, if you only risked $1,000 at a time, and you had some 25% wins, and you could gain $250 per position, just $250 in a month over 12 months. If you did that every month, you could gain $3,000 in that year. Okay, so $3,000 gain of $10,000 would give you 30% in that year. Now that would beat the market in most years. Now you would have to trade about 5 stocks at a time to find 1 or 2 winners that month, and you must be able and willing to cut your losses quickly, or this will not work. And preferably any losses not to exceed 5% on any position. So if you take that and you apply your current account balance, whatever that is, and you just try to be more selective with your trades, you can actually do pretty good trading individual stocks. So that is it for now. Let's get to some live charts. Maybe. All right, yeah, let's get to some live charts. Let's go over a quick market review. Okay, so wrong one. Let's get to a quick market review here, right? So we had this move up in the market, sideways, 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 and recently, this market has turned around this month in April, up just over 9% when it was down in March this year, down 5%. In the previous, 3 or 4 months, it was just going sideways, correcting sideways, and then we had this price correction in March, and now flipped back up to the upside. So I do want to caution you guys about that strong move up, because on a daily chart it looks even more extreme, where we had this this pullback through price and time, and then the market just flipped right up, went sideways for a few days, and it took off. This is a pretty historic run. This is really extremely strong. I'm expecting there to still be some volatility going forward. I'm expecting this market to at some point pull back in price, and so just be cautioned that we're up a lot in a very short period of time. Okay, and the other markets like the Nasdaq, pretty similar story, making new highs. The diamonds, not yet to new highs, but getting there, getting very close up. This was down 5.4% in March and up over 6% in April. IWM, very strong, making new highs this month, up over 11% in a month. So this has been a very strong month after a pretty scary February and March. So looks like markets are going to be going higher, but there could be some volatility in the short term. Transports, IYT index also very strong this month. So that's it for a quick, update there on the markets. Now I want to get to some, just a quick talk on technical analysis and kind of why it can get a bad name, but why I've bought into it. It can be subjective, so because there's not a lot of rules around it, you kind of have to make your own rules. So let's just use the SPY for example, because this is basically one of the largest markets, if not the largest market. It can be subjective because one of the things that makes it subjective is it works in any time frame. So this is a monthly chart, and obviously, it's been in this overall uptrend over the last 5 years. Yes, there's been some pullbacks like here. There's a pullback here in, in 2025, and now we just had a pullback here in early 2026. So, markets go back and forth, and that's just how they work. So there's not much we can really do about that. We just have to accept the fact that markets go up, they get overbought, they get overhyped, companies get, the valuations get out of line, stuff like that, and then they get sold off, and people take profits, and sometimes people take losses. And that's just kind of how the markets work. You won't see that on a fundamental report. You're not going to see that on when it comes to earnings, really, or sales, or revenues. But all that information does show up on the chart as buyers and sellers create supply and demand. So what you're really seeing on a chart is you're seeing a picture of supply and demand. You're seeing a picture of fear and greed. You're seeing a picture of like here, like a resistance area. You're seeing a picture down here of a support area. Right here would be a support area. Up here would be resistance. Okay. So this is where I think they can become subjective, because if I go down in time frame, it's going to look totally different. If I go down to a daily chart, it's going to look completely different than that monthly long-term chart. And so people get confused by that. That why do they look different in different time frames? It's because you're looking at different periods of information. And over the long term, if we go out to a quarterly chart, it's going to look basically, up and to the right. But in the short term, there's volatility, right? Here's volatility. Here's some volatility to the downside. Here's some volatility here. So we have to take that into account when we're trading, that there's going to be periods of ups and downs. Even though they say, the market always goes up. Well, if you look back in time long enough, yes, the market has always gone up eventually. But in the short term, it can really get pretty bad. Now, technical analysis is not perfect. It does not work perfectly, and it definitely takes some practice. However, when it comes to fundamental analysis and looking at companies and looking at how they're performing on a financial basis, that also is not perfect, because when a company sends out an earnings announcement, then that earnings announcement is reporting on activity from the past, usually 3 months. It's kind of like a report card. And then analysts and individuals and companies will take that information and try to project forward what they're trying to predict future growth. So they're looking at the past, saying, well, is the past performance a predictor of future growth? And sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't. And that's where I have a disagreement with some fundamentalists that, they think that it's infallible. And fundamental analysis is not infallible at all. And neither is technical analysis. So we have to be objective about that. I think technical analysis is generally misunderstood, and I think part of it is the multiple time frames that you can look at it. Okay, so that'd be a monthly chart, this would be a weekly chart, They're all going to look a little bit different, but it's just the same information in a shorter or a longer period of time. So you have to be able to interpret that information correctly, okay? And I think that's why it's misunderstood. Like I said, the fundamentals also fail too, because fundamentalists are trying to look forward and predict future fundamentals, which is, it isn't always possible to do that. So while as a technical analysis, I'm trying to predict the future price movement using past price action, and a fundamentalist is trying to predict the future based on the company growing in size and or earnings and sales and revenues and stuff like that. So let's talk about some key points when it comes to technical analysis. So what I'm going to do for this is I'm going to go to monthly chart, and I'm going to get rid of all these moving averages. First of all, let's get rid of these moving averages. We'll get rid of that one. We'll get rid of this moving average, and we'll get rid of that moving average there. Now we just have a chart, no grids, no moving averages, just price and time, okay? Now there's the idea of what's called pivots, or the pivot, okay? There's two types of pivots, okay? One is the idea that a pivot would be a point on the chart in time, like this low point here, okay? So this will be a low point or a low pivot. And generally you look to the left, a couple, 3 bars, and then you look to the right and you'll have a pivot. This would be a low pivot. This would be a high pivot, I think. Yeah, this one's just a little bit higher, so we'd have 3 bars to the left and we'd have 3 bars to the right. Again, there's nothing scientific about it. It's just that's how I learned it. 3 to the left and 3 to the right will create a low pivot or a high pivot, okay? Now, there's also the idea of a pivot after a strong move up or a momentum move up, and then it creates that pivot, right? And then over time, as a market or a stock corrects, it will go down. And what people or technical analysis often are looking for is areas of interest on a chart. And it just so happens, and I don't think this is a coincidence, but this pivot or this pivot point here creates an area of interest and an area where many times, not always, many times buyers again step up not only in that area but above that area and end up pushing prices higher of markets or individual stocks. And so we can see that play out, and I'll show this to you in many individual stock charts, but that's just the idea of a pivot. Again, there's high and low pivots. As I'm looking to go long on the stock, I treat this as an area of interest because it was a significant point on the chart, just as this low point was a significant point on the chart, okay? So we have key areas on charts for expansion of price, and we have key areas on the charts for contraction of price. So here would be an area of contraction or a base, and then we had an area of expansion up, and then we had an area of expansion down, and then we had an area of expansion going up, or an uptrend, okay? Now there's another interesting aspect of technical analysis where we have areas of support and resistance and areas of supply and demand. So down here would be an area of supply, right? Because when price came down, hit that area, buyers stepped in and pushed prices higher, signaling or indicating demand for that stock or that market. Now we also have an interesting line here where you can see all these bars are kind of lined up, going across right there. And that is an area of supply or resistance. Interestingly enough, that area, which I would call the ceiling, eventually over here at this pivot point became the floor. So the previous ceiling became the floor over here, which became like a springboard or a jumping off point for prices to move higher. Again, I don't think that's a coincidence, and you'll see that many, many times in technical analysis, that previous areas of resistance or supply later on became areas of demand, and prices moving up out of that area. Again, this is not perfect, but as we look, back in time here, this previous area or this pivot point where there was some resistance or supply, eventually all the way over here, this is like a couple years later, became an area of support and an area of demand. So just looking at that quickly, this low on this bottoming tail candle was 481.80 or 481.80. When we look back at this high point or this pivot area or this pivot point, the high on that was 479.98. Okay, so that is within, a very close percentage of, that previous point. It's not exact. Sometimes it can be exact or within a penny or two, but in this case, it's clearly within a very small percentage when you consider the price of this market. Right? That's only like 82 cents out of, $481. That's a very, very tight percentage. And so many people will ask, well, why does that happen? And I think the reason that happens is because other traders, other investors are looking at that area as an area of value. That particular price point offered some reason to buy there. And many times large institutions will take advantage of a certain price point, and then they'll put in a big order at that price point, and that order gets filled and just drives price up or down. It can go either way. We also like to take a look on charts at areas of interest when it comes to volume. I pay particular attention to areas of lower volume. Like if we look at this volume profile, you can see some areas of low volume. You can see some areas of higher volume. Here's an area of lower volume. Then we have another area here of kind of a protracted time of lower volume in general. We had an area back here of generally higher volume. Okay. One of the things I'm looking for, especially in individual stocks, is an area of relative low volume or relative high volume. We'll also see when it comes to technical analysis, especially at these pivot points, they tend to have higher volume. So here's a pivot point of resistance and supply, and we had a large volume spike there over these 2 months. And then we look forward in the future, we look at this candle, this bottoming tail candle, we have another situation where we have high volume, indicating that that is a definite area, a confirmed area of higher interest, therefore higher volume, and an area that we should pay attention to as technical traders. Now we can also look at moving averages. So if we put a moving averages on this chart, we can see that there's sometimes a correlation between a moving average, an area of interest or a price point, and a pivot point. So again, I took these moving averages off of here because I didn't want you guys to get confused with that. But sometimes all these things will line up: moving averages, pivot points, supply and demand. And then that becomes a very interesting area to us as buyers or sellers of stocks. Now, when I'm looking to go long, I'm looking for a stock or a market that has already been in an uptrend at some point in time. So back here we had an uptrend, and then we created this pivot point, and then that becomes significant. And then I'm looking for that pivot point to again essentially have buyers overcome that pivot point, right? So I'm looking for proof that buyers are willing to pay more now than they did in the past. That's one of the key areas that I'm looking for. Is first I need an uptrend, and then I need to confirm the new uptrend over that pivot point. That's another key area. Again, I'm looking for clues as a price detective and some proof or confirmation as it relates to my expectations for price to go higher from some sort of base. So I'm really looking for, you won't see it as much on a monthly chart, but a tight area of price. So this candle right here happened at a previous pivot point here. And then from that tighter area of price, or that consolidation of price on a smaller time frame, would probably form a base. And out of that base, prices moved up. Now, if prices had moved down from that base, that would indicate to me a failed pattern or a failed pivot point, just as we had right here, where prices moved up into a previous area of resistance or supply right here, just below this pivot, and from that area prices moved down. So again, if I had bought here on this tighter candle, I'd have a stop below there, and as you can see, I would have been stopped out, preserving my capital. So it's still very important to use some money management and stops when you're using technical concepts. Now, another thing we want to look at in technical analysis is, and this is the reason why I like to keep you guys updated on the current market trend environment, because the current market and trend will dictate a lot of what's going to go on with technical analysis. It's not just fundamentals. It's not just that a company is growing or has huge revenues or something like that. Market supply and demand can trump fundamentals, and overall market conditions can trump fundamentals and technicals too. Where you think you have a good opportunity, you take that opportunity, and then you end up having a loss. So new traders can get very confused about that. Everything looked right to me, but I still had a loss. Well, you have to accept that that's going to happen. Okay, so we need to look at the current market trend and the environment, and what are the hot industries or sectors that are currently in play right now. So think about new ideas, new products, and potentially whole new industries. And I can think of two right now that come to mind, actually three, but two of them for sure would be the current, what I call the current space race. This push to get everything into space and new space companies and SpaceX. That's huge right now. And another area is obviously computing and quantum computing and artificial intelligence. These seem to be the new growth areas right now. I also want to talk about, and I'll show you this guy. I'll show you this on one of the individual stocks I chose, and that is pattern or technical boosters. And some of these boosters would be huge revenue growth, huge sales growth, huge earnings growth, like double-digit earnings growth and double and triple revenue growth. And another key area is return on equity. That's another key metric that fundamental investors use. And also the volume of money moving in or out of a market or a stock. And to use that, we're going to use volume times the price of the stock. So that's the end of some key concepts. Let's get to a trade that I offer you guys, I think last week or the week before, or a potential trade, and why I chose this as a potential opportunity. Now, I did get stopped out on this opportunity, and I'm going to show you a few ideas. Now, this is an individual company, symbol BORR. So this stock looks pretty good. I think last week or the week before, I said, now that would be an idea for you guys to take a look at. So here we can see technically we had an area here of an area of interest, right? We had this little move up, we had a couple topping tail candles, and then we had an area where we're basically consolidated for 3 months. After that consolidation, where did price go? Price moved up. And this momentum move up was pretty big, right? We were up 59% this month, up another 15% the month after that, and then this month it was up, almost 44% in a month. Then we had this sell-off where price moved up and created what is, on this chart would be a pivot point. Okay, so again, the move up creates that pivot point out, and then, as the price moves down, you get this pivot point on the chart. And then that generally, again, not always, becomes a significant point of interest. And we can see as we look across from left to right, we can see that, this month was a significant point on the chart, which matches to that point. We also have, an area here of potential support where that pivot point was, and where price had moved up again out of that area, and then it moved down and retested that area. And as we continue to look across here, we see a lot of these candles line up, not perfectly, but within a percentage point of that pivot point. And eventually this market sold off in a big way from that pivot point. Can you guys see that? Where that point here lines up with these, 4, 5, 6 months of price action. And then eventually sellers took control and supply took control and fear overtook this stock. All right, creating a new low pivot point where we had a volume increase, and then eventually buyers increased their activity and put some buying pressure or some demand back into this stock, and prices moved up. So you can see clearly on a chart supply and demand, and where that supply and demand was created in relation to different points on the chart. Now, when I gave this trade, I think it was last week, we were up here. This looked good, and then we had this bottoming tail candle. It looked like prices were going to push up and maybe retest this previous pivot point area around the maybe around the $7 to $7.25 mark. Instead, if we look at a lower time frame, we had a little bit of a pullback in price there. So if we look at a daily chart, we can see, where we had this consolidation up here, and it looked like prices were going to push higher up to new daily highs, where price got tighter and tighter. But instead of going up, prices, for whatever reason, moved down. And now we created, this new area of interest. And we also created possibly an area here of support. We don't know if that's confirmed yet. But right now, the bottom of this candle on a daily time frame lines up at the bottom of this candle right here. It lines up with this candle here. There's also some alignment way back here on these other candles too, including previous resistance becoming support. Can you guys see that? Where previous resistance became support here, possibly support here again, and we will know that this week if prices move back up from that area of interest. So again, the ceiling becoming the floor in multiple time frames, right? So let's go back to the monthly time frame, and let's see, is there any confirmed support or previous support in that area on a monthly time frame? And indeed, there is right here, right back here in April and May of 2024. So last year we had some support there, which was eventually broken with this downtrend, but that's still an area of interest as as a potential buying or selling area. So that's just some concepts in real time in real life, even though I had a loss on this trade here, where I entered, I think I entered on this day or this day, thinking that it was going to push higher, and then I was stopped out, a couple days later. So that happens in trading, and you just have to accept that. So let's get to some other ideas here as far as some other potential opportunities for you guys going forward for the rest of April. Let's take a look at LRN. Okay, so again, I'm not using any indicators other than volume, which is really not an indicator. But so this is just straight up price analysis. No, not even any moving averages. So here we have a stock symbol LRN, Stride Company, which had an area of interest. We had a nice long base over, about 5 or 6 months. Price moved up, and then you see this bottoming tail candle tested that very area where there was this pivot. Okay, and then buyers stepped up a big way on volume and continue to push prices higher over time. Well, then we had some corrective price action in October of 2025, and this stock got sold off in a very strong way. And interestingly enough, the selling stopped around this previous point. So again, this is a significant area for buyers and sellers. And you can see, the selling basically stopped right in that area. And then kind of moved up, went sideways for a few months here, and now is starting to make another move higher. In January of 2026, this stock was up over 30%. It was up in March about 4.5%, and now it's up again in April over 11%. So isn't that interesting that as the market was selling off, this stock was improving? So I think that shows a little bit of relative strength. Again, we have a significant area of supply and resistance up here, and confirmed, supply when all the supply was dumped on the market, right? But now we're starting to make this kind of little trend up. Again, this is a monthly time frame, so each candle is a month. And we're still in April. We haven't closed April yet, but we've retraced quite a bit into this candle, almost 50%. I would say about 40% right now. And generally that becomes significant too, because about halfway up that candle is this candle from January of 2025, where there was previous support. If we can get over that, it looks like this stock has the potential to keep moving higher in a big way. Again, just an idea, but just trying to reinforce technical analysis that we've had this nice period of consolidation here. We've had this move up, creating this pivot. We have a reconfirmation on this day of this pivot here. And then we see price just kind of slowly moving up into that area and finally breaking out over that daily pivot. So I think this stock looks like it's got technically, the potential to keep moving higher. Now, again, we've been in a strong period here over the last several days, so I would say this is, extended on the daily time frame, but I did want to highlight for you guys some pattern boosters, okay? And this stock actually has pretty good fundamentals, okay? It's got, it is in the educational services industry. When we look at per share pricing, it makes money, $2.50 per share recently. Next earnings date is later this month on the 28th, so be cautious because earnings dates can be very problematic, very volatile sometimes. But it's got $8.33 per share earnings over the previous 12 months. It's got double-digit growth from the previous quarter and the previous year, so those are both fundamentally very good. We've got ratios in line with a successful company, low PE, right in the 11 to 12 range. PEG 0.6, that's great. It's got over 26% return on equity. That's great. Good profit margins, about 12%. Very low, almost no debt. A low price to sales ratio. Cash flows about 8 times price. Price to book is not out of line, and the price, I don't pay a whole lot of attention to that anyway, but that's not out of line. And some other key stats, right? Market cap over 4 billion. That's a decent sized company. Again, it has annual net income, so they're doing they have net profits. Last quarter sales over 631 million. 1 year return is negative, but 3-year and 5-year returns are very good. We've got nice high 5-year revenue growth and over 1,250% earnings growth over the 5-year period. So, the fundamentals, in my opinion, look pretty good on this company. Even though on a monthly chart, we had this big sell-off. Why that happened, I don't know. But it looks to me like going forward, this company is going to survive. This is probably very scary for investors, but it looks like it is improving. So that's an idea. Here's another one in the space industry, right? We had this IPO'd at $2,700 a share. That's an insane IPO number. And then it just sold off from there. Now we closed this week at 535. And this is just a gigantic base, where price is not really moving hardly at all, but we have some volume spikes. So these are interest, right? Areas of interest, where these volume spikes took place were in this month, the stock was up from 70 cents, closed the month at $3.14, up 349% in a month. That's significant on over 54 million shares in volume. Where some of these previous months, it didn't even get over 1 million shares. So that is an area of interest for sure, that 314. Next month, it sold off only 10%, closed the month at 280. Again, so far this month, it's up to 535. So this doesn't look like much on a monthly technical chart, but it's in the right industry space. And let's look at a daily chart. Daily, we've got a nice new uptrend, right? We've got, this pivot low. We've got this previous pivot high here where prices exceeded that pivot high, and the ceiling, right? The ceiling of supply became the floor over here of demand. And then it's moved up out of that area. We also have right here another area of interest. If we look left, we've got another pivot point here. Again, the ceiling becoming the floor. So this last day this week, we had an inside candle. We'll have to see where that goes from there, but it could pull back. It could go sideways for a few days or a week and then resume this uptrend. But it isn't an uptrend in the near term for sure. So that's an idea. Let's take a look at another one. Let's take a look at, I hope this reinforces the idea of technical analysis for you guys. Here's KOPN. I don't know much about this company, but again, on a monthly chart, right, we had the sell-off. We've had the sideways bottoming pattern. And we have some areas of interest. So here would be an area of interest where, when the price went sideways, moved up, created this pivot point here. Does that line up with anything to the right a little bit? Right here, it's kind of similar to that area as far as an area of interest, where the ceiling is now starting to possibly become the floor. Right above that, there's an area of supply, of significant supply, where we had the sell-off here. So we're right around that area right now. So for me, this is just a watch, right? And price could move up out of that area, but there's also been some volatility through that area where we've had selling and selling through here, and in the past we've had selling in that same area. So this one is a little more not as clean, I would say, but Still an idea to watch. And on a daily time frame, this recently over the past few weeks has been in an uptrend. So, it's a little bit of a strong uptrend on this stock. So I would wait and see if we get a better area of opportunity there. Let's take a look at Wolf Company, symbol WULF. Again, monthly. I'm going to go quicker so this video doesn't get out of control, but we had this move up, sell off, sideways base. Moved up a little bit, sold off from there, came back up, exceeded this pivot point, okay, in a big way, but later on created a bit of a floor right here, or an area where the ceiling became the floor over these 4 or 5 months. And now it looks like that's going on its way higher, into this bar, in this candle. It looks like this is going to head back up and test the highs, hopefully this year. So that looks like a potential opportunity just based on that monthly chart. But again, do your homework. Look down at the daily chart and see, is there any other areas of significant resistance, support, supply and demand? Are there any areas where prices moved up and then created a pivot? Did that pivot later on create, a floor? And are there any other areas where, price failed to go higher from that area? And we can see several where, price failed here. This is a false breakout. Again, later on, this price moved up to this area and sold off again in a hard way. And now, recently, eventually, this area is creating some support where there is demand right around that previous pivot area. So this is looking like a potential idea too going forward. So don't forget to check both higher and lower time frame charts. So let's take a look at, here's a few more for you. Here's Ring, symbol RNG for Ring Central, and a nice long bottoming pattern. And we see recently some demand based on volume and price. Price moved up over 40% in February this year, and just 2% in March, but moving up again in April. Here, up over 8% in April. Look at the volume spike here, and it looks like the buyers are starting to take over the market for Ring Central. Again, do your homework on that. We've got Lunar, another satellite space defense company. Pretty interesting pattern here. We have this huge spike in price for whatever reason, but up over 98% in this month, but then sold off hard. So that created a huge pivot up there, but it's also there's also another pivot right here, which is very interesting, where this high was 24.95. This week we closed at 27.58 over that pivot, so I like that. There's a huge void up here, so I really like Lunar. I do own some shares of Lunar at this time. We've got, what else do we have here? Let's find a few more for you. VRT, which stands for Veritiv Holdings. Nice strong uptrend, making new highs. This one is extended, I would say. We're well over this pivot and this pivot. And I don't think this would be the best idea at this time. I just want to show you guys that, you have to be careful where you buy. Because even though this is making new highs, it's quite extended up. And I would have to look at that if there's any fundamental reason for that, or if this is overbought. So you have to be careful of that too. Let's take a look at KeyCorp. This is another one on my list. KeyCorp, this is a monthly chart. On a monthly chart, right, we have this long-term pivot to the left. We had a sell-off from this area of interest. And now, the previous ceiling is starting to become the floor. See where all these tops of these candles line up? And these two candles line up. That's now starting to line up with support or demand over here. Can you guys see that? So this is becoming a key area. I am a current holder of KeyCorp based on the chart. Okay. This also has kind of a volatility contraction pattern or a price contraction pattern right here where a price tested this area, came back, tested this area right here again, sold off, but not in a big way, came back and finally broke out. This was a closing breakout in December 2025, and it's kind of went sideways ever since. So that's an interesting idea, KeyCorp. And we have, can't see what that says. Roku was, Roku was the other one on this list. Roku. Okay, Roku, again, interesting pattern. Sold off in a big way. It's been in a basically stage 1 base. Recently up so far over 22% in April. Looks like it's got a lot of void or a lot of room to move up there. There is quite a few pivots right here though. And that so far we've exceeded the we've exceeded these pivots with this closing week here over this area. So that looks good as far as going higher into an area of virtually no supply or resistance. Let's get to this other list. And so we can wrap up this video. Again, here I've just got one moving average on here. I'll get rid of that to make things simpler, but right here, MXL, I don't know what this company does, but it had a big move up, made a pivot point, sold off into a stage 4 downtrend. We had this area, where there was this consolidation, and then price moved down out of that area, moved sideways, again moved down, then moved up, creating this pivot area or this area of interest right here across all these candles. Can you guys see that where all these kind of match up across the top? So it becomes a significant area of supply or resistance. And at that time, this candle had a high of 26.59. This week we closed at 26.27 in a strong way after we consolidated for months. And this month, this stock is up 51%. Again, I don't know what they do. I don't have time to look at that right now, but this is definitely a stock on my list of interest. Let's also look at this one, CALY. Again, had a big stage 4 downtrend, several areas of interest, moved down. Now it's starting to move up again. So this is, one of my pre-qualifications is, does the stock go into some sort of new uptrend? And it has since last year. Now we've got an interesting area right here where we've got this area of resistance. And we can see to the right, that area is being tested right now, where we had this high point in January 2026, then we're going sideways, and now we've got a nice move up here in April, up over 10%. Again, if this gets over this area, this looks like it could continue higher, and a target on that would be this previous pivot at about 25.96. So that'd be a nice gain if this continues higher of, about a 10-point possibility to the upside. It's not in the industries I'm really interested in though. This is Callaway Golf. This would not be on the top of my list just because of that. But chart-wise, it looks pretty good. But it's not in the areas I'm really interested in right now, such as, healthcare, tech, space, quantum computing, stuff like that, okay? So here's another one, Kodiak Sciences, where we've got, a chart of interest because it had such a strong move up. But in my opinion, this is too far, too fast, even though it's broken out above this pivot, right, and this pivot here. It's just so far up that, how long can that continue? It may continue, but as far as the possibilities go, I would have rather bought down here at this pivot, okay? Because that would be a better probability of success. So that's one that's off my list, even though, I wanted to show that to you guys. Another one that's was interesting to me was this GCT, Giga Cloud Technology, where we had got this IPO at 1920, and currently the stock, that's weird. IPO, okay, so they must have had a stock split over this time. If this IPO'd at 1920, and on the chart today we're at 5180, it must have had some sort of stock split along the way. But you can see where it opened up, sold off, moved up, created this pivot, and that pivot has now been exceeded on a closing basis, both daily and weekly. Okay, you can see there where that was a pivot high. We've exceeded that on a closing basis. It looks like this is going back up to all-time high. So that's an interesting chart to me. I'd have to, again, do some homework to see if that'd be a good investment. But looks pretty good. So here's another one interesting. SEZL, Sezzle Inc., right? Had an IPO back here, moved up, create a pivot, move down, moved up, create another pivot, move down. And right now we're right at that point, right there. Area of interest, if that gets over that, that's got some room to the upside, technically. Okay, so one more and I'll end the video. MXL, Max Linear. Not sure exactly what this company does, but had a big move up, create a pivot, move down, create an area of interest, move down, create another area of interest, move down, right? Create these areas of consolidation or less volatility or price contraction. And then this kind of created a little bit, created this area of interest right across here. And right now we're right at that area after being up so far this month, 51%. So big move after big consolidation here since last year. And that looks like that could be heading to new daily, weekly, monthly, all-time highs. So that's it for the video. Again, thanks for watching, listening, subscribing, and supporting this Laptop Trader channel on YouTube. Again, here's my disclaimer. And any questions or comments, you can email me at laptoptraderphil.com. Again, this video is for information only. Should not be considered investing advice. Caution, trade at your own risk. Most stock day traders lose money. Okay, please protect yourself at all times. Good luck and God bless. Bye.